As Garfield once said in his infinite wisdom, you are not immune to propaganda. You can't run from it, you can't hide from it, all you can try to do is be educated on it. And of course, this is just as true in 40k as it is in real life. Pretty much every official thing put out by the Imperium is propaganda. You can argue all day long about how valid the propaganda being put forth is, but it's still propaganda. The Imperium wants you to abhor the Xenos, the mutant, and the heretic. The official government is trying to get you to think X way, so it's propaganda. But what if I don't want to listen to the Imperium's propaganda? Every faction deserves to have their own PR department, even if it's gotta be out of universe. The Tau have their own, and it's pretty successful, judging by how many worlds they've taken without a fight. I don't have an exact figure on that, but I know it's more than 0, so it's certainly worth the effort. But though I am a fan of them, I'm not giving you Tau propaganda today. It's been far too long since I've sat down and properly glazed the Eldar, and I feel like I'm getting rusty. In full transparency, the Elves of Warhammer Fantasy are no longer my favorite faction. The Tomb Kings have taken their rightful place on top there. But in 40k? Sorry Necrons, but you don't have Setcher the Imperishable, nor do you have rats with machine guns, so the Space Elves are still firmly #1. So today, I ask that you keep an open mind, because just like I did for Nagash, this video is going to be straight up Eldar propaganda. It is going to be 100% biased. I am absolutely going to twist facts to make them look better. And from the bottom of my heart, I want you to know that I won't feel bad about it in the slightest. But before we discuss the finer points of the people who gave rise to the goddess of pleasure, I must ask, would you like some pleasure? Because if so, look no further than the sponsor of this video, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve is nothing less than the finest purveyor of adult toys that this world has ever seen. There's items for men, there's items for women, there's items that I didn't know were something that would ever exist. There's a furniture section on the online store. Adult furniture. That's surely at least a little bit intriguing to you. And if not, there's thousands of other options for you to pick from. But maybe you want to keep it on the down low a little bit. Not a problem, Adam and Eve offers discreet shipping, so there's no need to worry about any awkward conversations about the box on your porch. And I can go a step further than that, because Adam and Eve has a 90-day hassle-free return policy. If you didn't quite get the bang for your buck you wanted, just send it back. There's 24/7 customer service to help you with that too, and with over 50 years of business history and 20% of their profits going to fighting the spread of HIV, every step of the way of getting some Adam and Eve products will feel good. If all that excites you, and it really should, then how about a deal for you? Go to adamandeve.com and use code Pancreas for 50% off one item, free shipping in the US and Canada, and free rush processing. Some exclusions apply. That's adamandeve.com and code Pancreas for 50% off one item, free shipping in the US and Canada, and free rush processing. If you need that special something to help you unwind after a long day, go grab yourself some Adam and Eve today. Now then, time for you to accept the truth of Eldar supremacy. Let's go back to the beginning for this, and I mean the very beginning of 40k's in-universe narrative, short of the Big Bang itself. 65 million years ago, give or take a couple of million years, some poor race decided they would ask their neighborhood grandparents for the cure to cancer. The neighborhood grandparents were assholes, so they told this poor race to get bent. This poor race decided that if they couldn't live happily, then no one could, so they turned Cthulhu and all his siblings into Decepticons, turned themselves into Terminators, and thus the greatest conflict in history broke out. The war in heaven is, ironically enough for this video, pretty damn sympathetic for the Necron side of things. But now is not their time, because the Eldar are immediately out of the gates swinging in this little conflict. The Catan and the Necrons were a juggernaut. The Old One's psychic might couldn't do anything to stop them. So in terms of getting the Eldar up to speed, as the Old Ones did, I imagine it's something similar to the Spartan 3s. Take this 6-year-old child, pump them full of drugs and augmentations, and tell them to go stop the horrible aliens advancing on everything they know and love. And by God, did that 6-year-old throw hands, because according to the Eldar 8th edition Codex, nothing could hope to stand in their way once they got serious. To quote the book itself, most of these conflicts, though, were so short-lived that the ease of their victory left the Eldari ever more sure of their ascendancy. The Necrons and the Catan at their height were nothing compared to the ancient Eldar, and quite frankly, even the books in modern 40k back that up to some extent. In the Mephiston series, he at one point encounters a Necron Lord, who comments that while powerful, he's a shadow of what the ancient Eldar could do. Mephiston can stop time, as I understand it, full-on the world-style time stop. And according to a very credible source who was there to witness the Eldar without any limitations, he's a child in comparison. This only makes sense because even in battles the Eldar themselves couldn't handle, they could easily find someone that could, specifically their gods. The Eldar pantheon is a bit hard to pin down in 40k. Maybe they're former Old Ones, maybe they got uplifted by the Old Ones alongside the mortal Eldar, or maybe the Eldar made them during the War in Heaven as weapons and just came to worship them as gods. I like the second option the most because I feel it gives them the most agency, but take your pick of the backstory, it doesn't really matter. Either way, the end result is still an Eldar champion realizing they need some help and then calling down the very heavens themselves to assist them, because in their glory days, divine intervention really was as easy as that. Such gods did things like ripping the Catan into little bite-sized pieces, like Cain with the Nightbringer. And don't you worry, I have things to say about Cain later. The outcome of the War in Heaven itself has been said by many to still technically be a Necron victory. Before the War in Heaven there were old ones, and after it there weren't really any. I'll give them that credit, the Necrons deserve as much. They fought hard, and the old ones are gone now. But in this war, there were two winners, and the greater victor was the Eldar. The Necrons went to sleep for, as far as I can tell, two major reasons. One is just that the galaxy was far too torn apart for them to be happy with. If they wanted their bodies back, best to wait till the galaxy could reseed itself with life after the conflict killed most everyone in it. The other reason was that they were very aware the Eldar were out there and more than happy to finish the fight the Necrons started. Given how effective the Eldar were in the War in Heaven, none of the Necrons were particularly keen to get ass-blasted to infinity and beyond by a solar system-sized psychic storm. And with that, it was unchallenged Eldar supremacy for 65 million years, and I want everyone to do a bit of a mental exercise together real quick. With the unlimited information granted me by a basic Google search, in our actual real world, humanity has been practicing agriculture for anywhere from 11,000 to 15,000 years. The timescale of the Imperium of Man is therefore anywhere from a little bit younger than agriculture itself to just as old. Furthering that notion, another look at the first page of Google tells us that recorded history beyond Neanderthal paintings on a cave wall began in about 3200 BC, meaning the Imperium is about 3.5 times older than we've been keeping track of things. The beginning of the Eldar's complete dominance over the galaxy happened when we still had dinosaurs. And you know why everyone just glosses over this little fact? I can give you two reasons. One is that GW authors, as with most sci-fi authors to be fair, fail to grasp any sense of scale. It's why it sometimes feels like nothing happens in between the Horus Heresy and 40k. The second more important reason is that humans as a whole can't grasp that kind of timescale. You do not understand what 65 million years is. I'm not judging, I don't either. We're just not built for that. But as best you can, I want you to keep that fact in mind. The Eldar were almost completely unchallenged for 65 million years straight. The Earth was ruled by lizards when they first took power, and it wasn't until mankind in 40k reached the stars that the first signs of their power slipping began to appear. As far as I know, the only race that once overtook them temporarily was the race that coined the term Monkai among them. If my math is correct, a big if, given how dogshit I am at math, that's one moment of them faltering over all that time. Want another fun time span fact? Well, it's my video, so you're getting one no matter what. Our good friend known as the first page of Google once again comes to the rescue, because according to it, 70% of oil formed 66 million years ago or earlier. Breaking out the calculator, if we subtract 70 from 100, we get 30. The Eldar were in power longer than 30% of the oil on Earth has been in existence. The Eldar are older than fucking oil. During this time, another two important things to note occurred. The Sea of Souls began turning into chaos proper, with Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeent eventually forming into proper chaos gods. Yet despite 3 of the 4 chaos gods being present, none of them were able to truly gain mastery over the warp, nor intervene in real space, at least not to the extent that they would from the Horus Heresy onwards. Once again, I am giving the Eldar and their gods all the credit for this. For 65 million years, and since warp time is all funky, it could very easily be longer than that, the Eldar pantheon held chaos at bay. Even during the Eldar gods' war in heaven, where they all picked sides between Cain and Vol, chaos couldn't sink their claws in either the Eldar nor their gods. They just couldn't, and don't tell me they didn't feel like it, because they absolutely would've if they had the chance. Asurion, Isha, Cain, Morai Heg, any other god I can name, their efforts kept the galaxy as clean of chaos as it possibly could be post-war in heaven. During this time, the Eldar were also all perpetuals, because death wasn't a thing. They just reincarnated, memories optional if they wanted a clean slate. Once again, according to the 8th edition codex, the stars themselves lived and died at their whim. They would ride solar flares like the Silver Surfer for fun. Though they had their own gods, each Eldar might as well have been one. It's no wonder they felt they were supreme like Gelt, because they could just show up to a system, decide it lost sun privileges, and then leave. It's slight exaggeration, no one is supreme like Gelt, but by God they were close. But let's skip ahead to the end now, and by god am I gonna go into overdrive to turn them creating Slaanesh into a victory, or at least a defeat that makes him look good. Consider that the fall of the Eldar took place over a few thousand years until the early 30th millennia, where the dam finally broke and a torrent of fluid best unmentioned flowed from it, birthing Slaanesh. Considering how long they were around, this was an admittedly rapid decline brought about through their own hubris and degeneracy, but there's some things going into it that make it not as bad as you might think at first. It occurred after 65 million years straight, as I've been saying, of being pretty goddamn straight edge, all things considered, for one. It happened because it was rather exponential in how it progressed. Started as some guys not going into work one day because they felt they earned a break, and then a month later it turned into the most horrific orgies you'd ever seen. Not helped by this is the fact that the craft rollers and exodites were the moral purists who told everyone to maybe put down the heroin needle on Mondays at least, or something like that. When they left, no one was around to tell the remaining Eldar to chill out with the rampant hedonism, so it only accelerated. Now with all that, think of it this way. The other three Chaos Gods were the galaxy's collective sins and dark subconscious thoughts. They came about because of the war in heaven, which technically makes them all the Old Ones and Necron's fault, as well as the galaxy at large for being so awful. Slaanesh was all the Eldar. So powerful were they even during their rapid slide into ruin that they alone created a Chaos God. Compare that to the Emperor and all that Dark King nonsense during the End and the Death and whatever the hell that was. It took him the galaxy's largest empire ripping itself in two, 19 demigods waging war against each other, and all the suffering those things entail to form the conditions that would have created the Dark King. That would have been mankind's Chaos God. The Eldar created the same thing after 5 minutes in the bathroom with a magical crackpipe. Even when they're dooming us all, no one can match the scale of the Eldar. For that matter, consider the birth of Slaanesh itself and what it says about the Eldar. The psychic scream of her becoming real caused Orican the Diviner, who has no soul and cannot feel that sort of thing, to become so traumatized he hid away in his own little pocket dimension for hundreds of years, meditating and calming himself down. That's what the collective power of the Eldar accidentally unleashed on the galaxy. It's an Eldar-L, I'm not going to pretend that Slaanesh was good for them, but their psychic might and resonance in the warp created a being that affected soulless creatures like the Necrons enough to traumatize them. And getting to the modern Eldar now, I want to address Cain first of all. Cain loses in pretty much everything he's in. If an avatar of Cain shows up, you can safely assume the Eldar are about to lose. Sure enough, when the Pantheon was devoured, he lost his battle against Slaanesh. But him losing that battle shows how strong he was if you look just a little bit into it. When Slaanesh had eaten the rest of the Eldar Pantheon and was at the height of her power, Cain fought her to a standstill. True, he didn't win, but he wasn't losing either. Cain at this point was fighting the strongest Chaos God head-to-head and holding firm in the battle. He only lost when Khorne decided to get in on the action and claim Cain for himself. He and Slaanesh poured their power into Cain to claim him as their own, and the bloody-handed god was ripped into pieces. Cain isn't anathema to chaos in the way the Emperor is. There's nothing particularly special about him that makes him inherently counteract chaos. Yet despite him fighting Slaanesh at her strongest when all his followers who'd empower him were dead and therefore he was at his weakest short of being shattered, he held firm. It took the two strongest Chaos Gods wrestling over him to defeat him, and he still didn't die. He just broke and landed on all the craft worlds in real space. Cain was so powerful that he couldn't be killed even with Slaanesh and Khorne's combined might pouring into him. He broke apart instead. As for why he loses all the time, it isn't even because he's an Eldar character and therefore destined to lose to Imperials, although that doesn't help. It's because he can respawn. If you can respawn, you will be defeated in whatever you show up in. He can die infinitely many times and always come back, so he gets killed to show how cool whoever killed him is. But in Caiaphas Cain, we see just what he can do when the writers actually treat him with respect, and what he can do is orbitally drop onto an enemy Titanfall style and rip a demon princess apart. Jurgen was there, which certainly served to weaken the demon, but Cain's a warp god too. He would have been a bit worse off from Jurgen's presence as well, but the man kept going. And I'll let you in on a little secret from the tabletop. Cain beats Angron in a fight. Fate Die can give him a free 6 on his ranged attack, which in turn gives him potentially another 3 hits with his ranged attack. Combine that with his melee profile, his ability to have all damage, and his inherent toughness and save, and Angron's getting bodied. I am telling you from experience. Kayla Mencha Cain, when treated with the respect he deserves from his stats, is a monster. He tied with Scarbrand as well in the lore, which is quite the feat. Also a quick shout out to Isha, who despite being deprived of power, locked in Nurgle's garden, and completely cut off from the Eldar, still has the power to insta-cure any disease thrown at her and can whisper the cures to her mortal followers. That's a pretty good goddess to worship. better than the Corpse Emperor, I'd say. But the Eldar themselves now, though shattered, are still capable of tearing anyone who tries to step up to them a new asshole. Consider Baal-Tan. The Imperium gets 2 sector fleets, which can be anywhere from 100 to 150 warships, 10 Space Marine chapters and all that entails, all over a single planet. The end result was a decisive Baal-Tan victory, and it belongs to Baal-Tan alone. While the Imperial forces could call upon all the different Forge worlds and more for supply, reinforcements and whatnot, Baal-Tan had itself and only itself after Iyanden refused to help them, and they won handily. They were certainly bloodied from it, but it was very much a win for them. Speaking of them and Iyanden, consider the Scouring. After the Horus Heresy, the Loyalists drove the traitors into the Eye of Terror, and cleansed the galaxy of any remnants of traitorous forces hanging around. Except they didn't do it alone, not that any of them knew this. Iyanden and Baal-Tan each took half the galaxy to cleanse of chaos, because a corrupted galaxy is not a good one to live in. And I couldn't find a single instance of them losing. Now granted, there isn't much really expounded upon in this time period beyond them fighting against chaos. But Iyanden's lore in particular tells me that this is because their victories were so assured that it's not worth going into detail beyond that. Iyanden's whole current shtick is that they're so beat up that they have to use Wraith Guards as normal troops, and their losses and Pyrrhic victories are elaborated on in detail because of this. You gotta explain how they fell so far from grace they have to resort to necromancy to get by. We haven't heard about any defeats against chaos during this time, and Iyanden is noted as having been rather arrogant about the Tyranid threat that ultimately reduced their numbers so greatly, as well as Prince Uriel's general arrogance. If they ever lost against chaos during this time, we would have known, because they either wouldn't be so arrogant or would have had mentions of defeats that led to the Wraith Guard, so I have to conclude they never lost. Any Chaos Space Marines or other cults present in these parts of the galaxy were surely defeated handily, for otherwise it would have been a noted part of Iyanden's backstory. And before any Imperial or Chaos fans go, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, I'd also remind you that it's not evidence of any of these things happening either. The Xenos are allowed to simply win too, not just the human factions. Baal-Tan for its part would go on to defend 3 maiden worlds against demon invasions all at the same time after losing half their population, and Iyanden would go on to have Prince Uriel stab a Tyranid so hard it hurt the hive mind itself. Not just the bug he stabbed in any in Synapse range, the hive mind itself. The intergalactic, species-wide consciousness of an entire species was hurt by one Eldar and his pointy stick. Gorguts would be proud if he knew of it, no doubt. And despite the Horus Heresy being Space Marine the series, there's a few moments where the Eldar are shown to still be incredibly capable despite their fall from grace. Remember when Fulgrim dragged Perturabo on his wild ride to ascend to Demon Princehood? They landed on a former Eldar world, and immediately were shown why that was a horrible, horrible idea, because the defenses of that world were not happy to see these primitives traipsing about for their own selfish and petty desires. Not long after they landed, Wraithbone constructs rose to defend their home, and they cut, stomped, and blasted through the Marines present like they were nothing. Better yet, strange ghost-like warriors made up of smoke and light actually cut through the Marines present like they weren't there. Their weapons passed through them without leaving a scratch, but the Marine would just keel over dead. Fulgrim's ascension was the only thing that saved everyone present. If he didn't become a demon Primarch, there'd be 2 less traitor legions in the galaxy, all from one single Eldar world's defenses. What about everyone's favorite dickhead Eldrad? Eldrad's in a real unfortunate position. He's a real strong guy, but being a Xeno who has high-stakes plots, he has to lose in the end. Cue the Death Watch stopping a ritual that would kill Slaanesh. But when he's allowed to do his thing unhindered, he makes Magnus look like a goddamn child. I do apologize for this bit coming up, because I have to mention John Grammaticus. If it makes you feel better, it's John Grammaticus about 2 seconds from shitting his pants in Unremembered Empire. Johnny Boy was on Macleod doing perpetual cabal, whatever the hell garbage plotline stuff, when he suddenly came down with a killer headache. Accompanying this headache was also time itself grinding to a halt across Macleod, and what he knew was an Eldar trying to reach out to him. He assumed it was the one that was part of the cabal and told him to piss off until he could recover a bit. After this, things went back to normal. He went to a tavern to get some grub and realized that, oh shit, there's mirrors in this tavern too, which means it's time for more psychic crap to happen to him. Time once again freezes, the world outright becomes blue-tinted as he realized the waiters attending him were stopped mid-conversation, Eldrad walks in, and John Grammaticus is sitting there paralyzed with fear. John Grammaticus is a perpetual. He can respawn. and when confronted with Eldrad, all he could think of was that death itself had come to his little corner of reality. Eldrad then casually reveals that not only has he implanted all sorts of knowledge in Jon's mind without him knowing, but that he is fully aware that the Ultramarines librarians had noticed what happened in spite of time being stopped, and that Jon didn't need to worry about it. In 8 minutes, a larger psychic event would occur, and then after that, something even worse would happen. Sure enough, in 8 minutes, some wordbearers tore through the warp onto Macleod, and after that, Conrad Curze descended. Eldrad, when he's on his A-game, is absolutely terrifying to behold. Reality itself is his plaything. He's a thin, graceful, silent specter of death who can decide you need to explode now, and then you explode. He was also supposedly a friend of the Emperor at one point prior to the Great Crusade, as evidenced by some Harlequins telling some Imperials that. Xeno's so goddamn capable and impressive he predicted some wordbearers and Conrad Curze arriving down to the second, and was friends with Big E. Worth noting is that Mephiston, while not being super stressed with time stopping either, has a somewhat limited radius he can do it in. Eldrad told a big chunk of Macleod, if not all of it, to go to the timeout corner. All that was really said was that the librarians were aware of a psychic event having occurred. Not that it was an Eldar causing it, nor that it was ongoing. Just that while time was stopped, they were aware something was happening. Which could mean anything from he only stopped time locally to the librarians would know the instant he resumed time that something was going on. Or even that they were aware time was stopped but couldn't do shit because time was stopped. Either way, the end result was an Eldar slipping onto Macleod, getting what he wanted, and then going merrily on his way without anyone being able to stop him. He's also calmed the warp down to allow the Imperial Fist to reach Terra during the War of the Beasts. The warp. The thing the Eldar can only barely interact with now that Slaanesh is a thing. He made the warp sit the hell down for a bit and behave so the Marines could go do their thing, like it was no big deal. And he, like every other Eldar, is restrained by Slaanesh's existence. He can't show his true power level like a Dragon Ball Z character because then his soul is forfeit. If other Farseers were allowed to be unchained, they'd probably be able to do what he did, and God only knows what Eldrad could do then. And yet every dedicated Eldar Psyker is still at the very least an equal match to something like a Space Marine librarian. Salandri Veilwalker might as well have pulled Mephiston around by the ear when she needed him. Farseers, when they do let the runes burn out and overload their power, are destined to die and be consumed by Slaanesh, to be sure, but so is everything on the planet they're on. They are unmatched beacons of psychic might, short of something like a greater demon of Tzeentch showing up, like when a group of 6 of them invaded Nurgle's garden to rescue Isha. They only finally lost when their physical bodies withered away from the plague affecting their craft world. For days prior to that point, they were in the home of one of the Chaos Gods, ripping his forces a new one. In the very few moments we've seen them act unbound, nothing can stop them. I mean, this picture of them fighting the Thousand Suns says it all. Eldrad is contesting Magnus himself, and the Avatar of Cain isn't the slightest bit worried about what's going on around him. He's just walking right up to Magnus like, oh, I am so gonna kick your bright red ass, Magic Man. This is the premier psychic demonic army in the galaxy, and the nerfed Eldar are going toe-to-toe with them. And to top off my Eldrad glazing sesh, he beat Abaddon. In hand-to-hand combat, he beat the Despoiler. Ulthwé was invaded, but Abaddon should have consulted his own future-seeing stuff a bit more, because the entire thing was turned into a kill zone designed to whittle down his forces as he approached his battle with Eldrad. And then Eldrad won. Abaddon fans will cry out that the lore blurb mentions how Eldrad achieved the one timeline he won out of the countless thousands he lost, which I say, okay, sure, in those other outcomes he lost the duel, but he didn't get those outcomes. He won. Abaddon fled Ulthwé with his tail between his legs, which means Eldrad did what people like Sigismund couldn't. I am absolutely going there, I don't care. All of this has been Craftworld Eldar though, I realize. What about the other main factions? Hello Dark Eldar, how horrible to see you. Let's start from their beginning as well. All Eldar tech is based on psychic stuff being at least partially integrated. It's literal techno-sorcery. The Dark Eldar, however, can't use psychic powers because otherwise Slaanesh will home in on Kamara and eat them all. So the Dark Eldar had to rebuild their entire technological base from the ground up, because if they used any of the stuff they used to have, they'd get devoured. You know how the Imperiums have been trying and failing to do that for a million different reasons? Well, the Dark Eldar did it. From an arguably worse starting position too, because Imperial tech doesn't require magic it can no longer use to function. And furthering things the Dark Eldar do better than anyone else, terror. The Dark Eldar are the most horrifying force in the galaxy. Yes, even better than you, Night Lords. Actually, I've noticed that they seem to get the most respect and credit out of all Xenos, at least in this specific area. People might argue all day long whether or not Chapter Master Scrunglius Maximus can beat a Dark Eldar Incubus in a fight, which is fair enough. But no one argues that if it does look like he's gonna lose, that he should immediately try to blow his head off with his pistol, because dear God, being taken to Camera is a fate worse than being lost in the warp. And absolutely no one argues the fact that none of his chapter mates should try to rescue him, because willingly going to Camera without either infinite plot armor or a Dark Eldar specifically wanting you there is a great way to get yourself turned into a chair. They can't overtake the galaxy, sure, but none of them wants that. They want a divided galaxy fighting amongst itself so they can swoop in, terrorize the enemy, steal a couple million people, and then piss off, and by God does 40k provide just that. Their win condition is already achieved, because it's a galaxy divided against itself while they have free reign to slurp up the souls of everyone in it. Everyone who says they'd lose in a straight up fight against the other factions is missing the point. Everyone else will never get that straight up fight. They'll never get the one-on-one brawl against the Dark Eldar that'll put them out of the game for good. Go ahead, try and cyclonic torpedo Camera. At best, you'll ruin a small part of it that gets detached from the greater whole. Most likely, they're gonna throw it back at you. And at worst, the entire group you sent to deliver the payload is now being tortured for all time because they find it mildly amusing. And yes, this terrifying force can strike out of the shadows from the webway without warning. Yes, they do this all the time. No, there isn't anything that can be done to stop them 99% of the time. Something to keep in mind is that when you see a Dark Eldar tabletop match, it means something has gone wrong for the Deldar. For most of their raids, they just whisk away half a planet in the middle of nowhere into the night. And if they do need to fight, which is something that you can't really replicate on the tabletop in the name of fun, they make it as unfair as possible. Whoever stands against them will be poisoned, flashbanged, kneecapped, and drugged before the fight even begins. Then they show up and drag you kicking and screaming somewhere you'll never get out. All of which assumes they don't just steal your son for giggles. Good luck to any Astartes that try swiping a chainsword at the empty vacuum of space. Though I'm not glazing them as much as the rest of the Eldar, I don't need to, because as it stands, the Dark Eldar are winning. They want a galaxy where they can freely pick and choose from across it for slaves and victims. They have it right now. The warp breach from the Great Rift in Camera was sealed by the Mandrakes, and while Vex's position might be a bit shaky at the moment, that's just a political change. It's hardly something that's going to end their society, it's just a potential change of who's the biggest boss. And to everyone who complains about how they're terribly dishonorable and it makes them cowards that they fight the way they do, complain away. I'm sure that'll convince them to let you go free. Not totally just turn them on or something like that. Regular Eldar do the same raiding thing almost as effectively, mind you. They just usually don't take prisoners or revel in the slaughter. They aren't freaky like that. But of course, let's not forget the Harlequins. You know how everything is canon, not everything is true? And how people usually use that excuse whenever GW releases something the fanbase doesn't like, rather than for anything resembling nuanced discourse? Yes, I am being an arrogant snob right now, I don't care. This is an Eldar video, it's called Getting Into Character. Well, how about this? The Harlequins absolutely did body the Custodes on Terra. The author coming out and saying he meant it was actually the Lucifer Blacks? Imperial propaganda, to hide the fact that some clowns gave the Emperors 10,000, the worst KD ratio they'd ever received. The Harlequins are an unstoppable force of comedy and mayhem. Their weapons are like if you took a joy buzzer and hooked it up to the Wunderwaffe from COD, among other rather more disturbing things like the Harlequin's kiss. Do you like people soup? Because that's what their weapons make. And they just can't be stopped from showing up and doing whatever the hell they want. They'll show up on Terra, they'll show up on Forge Worlds, on Civilized Worlds, they'll Fortnite dance straight through Camera and the Craft Worlds, and no one can stop them. Aside from their mastery of the webway letting them show up wherever, they're strong enough to kill you if you try to stop them. They're quick enough that by the time the Inquisition has shown up, they're long gone. And if you try to follow them, welcome to the webway. It actively wants you dead for trespassing, and within it is the last god of the Eldar that has been unbroken by Slaanesh and is free. He's gonna kill you in the funniest way possible. Give it a go. Try to go into the Black Library to get rid of them once and for all. When it's posted on whatever the Craft World version of LiveLeak is, we'll know how it went. Other minor things that aren't worth a full paragraph are things like Wraithguard and the other Wraith constructs. Did you know as of time of writing on the tabletop, Wraithguard are 2 points of toughness stronger than Terminators? A dead elf is tankier than the chapter's finest. Wraithlords are Eldar Dreadnoughts that can do backflips, and Wraith Knights are Imperial Knights, but the same thing. Everything is better with elves, simple as. Aspect Warriors and Incubi move like Dragon Ball Z characters, because the average person just can't see it happen. They see the Eldar, they blink, and then their top and bottom halves are separate things. Incidentally, if you have to pick which Dark Eldar to fight, pick an Incubus. They'll at least just kill you instead of dragging you back to horrific torture. Don't forget Farseers seeing the future with damn near perfect clarity. The real reason you only ever see Farseers getting things wrong, aside from author bias, is that when Farseers get it right, there's no battle, there's no book to talk about. The Eldar have already redirected things in their favor, and we don't get a book out of it because it's nothing happening. At most, they quietly assassinate someone and then move on. Farseers are the ultimate authority on seeing the future, aside from Kairos Fateweaver, who is insane, and we only never see the actions they take that save Eldar lives, ironically enough, because the result is usually nothing happening. But I'm not done, because I will now give the Ynnari some slight bit of credit. Yes, their trilogy sucked so hard it didn't even manage to become a trilogy. Yes, their lore is nothing but setback after setback, loss after loss. And yes, GW hates this faction and it will forever languish in canon limbo. But you know what? It's proof that the Eldar have the capability to make some serious goddamn waves if they want to. And I'm just gonna say it in more creative ways than the other factions too. The Tyranids just coming to eat, the Orcs just to fight, the Tau are always trying to make friends, Chaos and the Imperium are just bashing their heads against each other and praying to X-God that everything works out. Or good old reliable, bring back another Primarch, it's not gonna get old. But the Eldar, they saw a chance for a specific plan of action and took it. Bring Ennead forth without killing everyone, defeat Slaanesh, and then finally catch the slightest break after 10,000 years of misery. And they almost did it. And much like I've said for Nagash, this was not a ritual that failed because it was beyond them. Were it not for the Death Watch, Ennead would have been born. Slaanesh would have been slain or at least severely weakened, and while the galaxy would still be stacked against them, they would have had a real, actual chance to regroup and catch their breaths. They could have started thinking about putting more work into colonizing or rebuilding now that they don't need to be so careful with their lives. They could have unleashed more of their psychic might onto the galaxy. Ennead wasn't a failure because he was an impossibility, he failed because his summoning was stopped. And even though Yvraine kinda sucks, she did give the Eldar, and to a lesser extent the galaxy at large, something it hadn't had for some time. Hope. Hope that Slaanesh could be defeated. Hope that with Guilliman's return she assisted, the light at the end of the tunnel could actually be reached. Such is the power of the Eldar, the bringers of hope. And to wrap us up, the Phoenix Lords. They're awesome. They're Primarch-level figures in a species that didn't need genetic and magical witchery to make them. They're just built different. Across the galaxy when they show up, the Eldar are almost unstoppable. Jane Czar was a Night Lord's blender for a little while, only being stopped by a suicide bomb. Without that, she would have kept on blending. And it's not like it stopped her, because Phoenix Lords can also respawn. She'll just possess another Eldar and get right back to it. Maugan Ra rolled up his sleeves, spit in his hands, and slew a Tyranid Hive fleet by himself. Unless you go by newer versions of that lore because you suck and are boring, in which case it was only a single hive ship by himself. Or Asurman, the Eldar version of the greatest of them all. He's so renowned that there's legends across the galaxy about him amongst other species, not just the Eldar. He started the path system and pretty much invented their modern society, leading to warriors trained over hundreds of years unmatched by any other in their specific craft. But do you know what I think his greatest feat is? Something that shows who he ultimately is deep down? Starting a soup kitchen on an Imperial world. Because that's just what he did. On a world that was soon to be invaded by Tyranids, a charity organization called The Hand was handing out food, medicine, and other basic goods to Imperial citizens to make their lives better. Sure enough, the authorities in charge were at one point suspicious it was a gene stealer cult. After all, Tyranids are coming, this group is being suspiciously charitable. If you looked hard enough, you'd probably see some of these people had 3 arms. But no, it was just that, a charity organization, one that also provided information on the threats both above and below in regards to the Tyranids. The only other theory was that some noble felt a bit guilty at living so well while everyone below him lived in squalor, so they decided to help out a bit. When shit hits the fan, an Eldar reveals himself. The Space Marine character immediately points a gun at him, because of course, but the Eldar simply replies that he's a friend and he works for the Hand, who protects the people of the planet. And when the Hand finally makes his appearance, which includes him soloing 2 Carnifexes, it's none other than our boy Asurman, also known as the Hand of Asurian. And I did honestly try to see if there was some sort of Eldar scheme to gain trust so 1,000 years down the line they could walk into the planet and kill everyone on it or something. But all I could come up with was that the scheme was make nice with the Imperials so they can fight the Nids off better as well as allow us to help them, which is not much of a scheme. If that was the scheme, it's just being a good person. So you know what? That's my final piece of Eldar propaganda for you. I could say plenty more, but this is about 20 pages of script of me blowing my load all over the knife ears. My final piece of propaganda and glazing is that when the Eldar come around, give them a chance, because there's pretty decent odds they just want to hand out alms to the poor. And in the grim darkness of the far future where there is only war, the man who opens a soup kitchen has the greatest power of them all. kindness. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Eldar to my 40k. This setting would be nothing without your scheming, plotting, and fey trickery. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Hello again, person remaining for the end of it. Depending on your choice of favorite factions, I just got a little question for you. If you're a Death Watch or General Imperium fan, answer me this. Would you still say that all Xenos must die if you were speaking to Optimus Prime? Would you look him in the eye and say the Autobots are lesser than humans simply for not being human? Or would you go full AdMac and shout out about abominable intelligence? Because if you do either of those things, then I gotta say, I'm disappointed. Not mad, just disappointed.